I don't know about you, but I love hanging out with my friends who have all different kinds of skin tones. But I don't like it when people judge me of whether or not I should be hanging out with them because we're not from the same race. I love going on hikes and smelling the fresh air of the trees without worrying that they might be cut down. I love going to the top of mountains and playing with the snow without the mentality that one day there may be no snow left. And I love going to the oceans and swim with my friends without the fear that there might be radioactive wastes in them. But unfortunately, this is not true due to the problem web. Racism, deforestation, climate change, and militarization are just a few examples that conform the problem web. The problem web is really simple. It is the web in which we are all tangled in. This web consists of global issues or problems. These global issues or problems are connected with each other and affect our day-to-day lives without us even realizing. I am a 16-year-old journalist and photographer. That means I go around asking people for stories, especially stories about their home countries. But recently, and I write about them in my blog called Historias de Hogar. But recently, I've noticed something odd in these stories, something that shouldn't be there. Let me show you a few examples. A few weeks ago, I interviewed my friend Tommy from Vietnam. He started talking to me about how every time it rained in the streets of Ho Chi Minh City would flood. And Tommy and his siblings would go out and play in the water. This story seemed carefree, it seemed fine, but every coin has two sides. What I didn't know before doing some research about this was that they were also destroying houses, displacing families, and affecting the country's economy and agriculture. So, even though it does rain in Vietnam, recently the floods have been getting more powerful and devastating, mainly for two reasons: deforestation and climate change. Deforestation because the trees we're cutting down regulate the amount of water in the soil, and by cutting them down, it leads to more water getting stranded in the surface. And climate change, mainly because the globe is heating up, causing an increase in heavy rainfall, which leads to a higher risk of floods. A few days later, I interviewed my friend Hilaila from the Marshall Islands. She started talking to me about how her grandfather would always tell her these stories about the Marshall Islands, how he would go in the mornings and swim in the crystal clear waters. And then I asked her how growing up in this land was for her. But she told me that her family had to migrate from the Marshall Islands to Hawaii due to the fear of the effects of the nuclear weapon testings done in the Marshall Islands. So the radioactive contamination left behind in the Marshall Islands made Hilaila's family, inculcated a fear in Hilaila's family that it could not be a safe place to live. But this radioactive contamination was leaking out to the ocean due to sea level rising caused by climate change. So the nuclear testings, or so-called militarization, took away this right from her. This is when I started seeing a pattern, a web between all of these stories. Climate change and militarization caused Hilaila's family to migrate. Right after I talked to Hilaila, I discussed about the pattern with my friend Elsa from New York. And she discussed a different issue. She told me how she thought militarization and racism hold hands one with the other. She told me how being raised as a woman of color, before what happened to Michael Brown in Ferguson and before the police brutality against people of color was a huge social media thing, she was told that every time she encountered the police, all she could say was, "Yes, sir," "No, sir," "Yes, ma'am," or "No, ma'am." And this is because she was raised with two men of color that were stopped by the police and told to get out of their vehicles for no apparent reason. In some communities, the police has been acting as a form of organized violence or militarization. Fear and ignorance led us to believing in the negative stereotypes about how people different than us believing in the negative stereotypes about people who are different than us could be dangerous. The problem web becomes even bigger and more tangled. But why should you care? Well, in reality, no matter where you go, you'll still be tangled in the web. And you can't escape without a fight. So think of your own story. Do you see any pattern between the problems that affect your day-to-day lives? If you do, then you should do something about it. Like our friend Gandhi said, you must be the change you want to see in the world. I challenge you to pick up one of these problems, just one. You can start, and obviously fight against it. You can start by doing something locally and build up from there. You can start an organization with your friends, talk about your story, and inspire other people to make change. Some people are already making change, like Ashlyn, who organized the March for Our Lives in my community. Samir built his own hydroponic garden to provide sustainable food. Holly is currently fighting against discrimination by encouraging others to volunteer in Special Olympics. Ilan stands up for people that are being victims of racism. Jordan and Sarah stopped using plastic. And Ivani stopped using palm oil because in order to obtain it, we have to burn the forests of her home country. So think of something you could do to defeat the web, because I think that if we can defeat just one of these problems, we will be able to defeat them all in time. I wish for a world in which when I interview people, they don't come up with a story that has been distorted by the web. I wish to leave a world for my children in which they don't have to worry about the problem web. And I wish that after this talk, you think about your own story and how different it could be if you defeat your own problem web. Thank you.